GameStop,
meme stocks,
Dogecoin.
Have you had fun yet? It's been a pretty great year for just about everything hype. Shaq's selling SPACs, Lindsay Lohan's making NFTs, Dogecoin is worth more than several nation states. But I get it, you're thirsty. You want something more. Something that transcends all of these meme stocks and coins. You want something that is greater. Maybe something that transcends reality in of itself, where the lines between human consciousness and the physical world splinter and fragment, where numbers on a screen are but mere astral projections, encapsulations of greed and glory that man has sought since time eternal. The thirst for something greater. Well, you won't find that here, but I can tell you a little bit about the wonderful world of psychedelic stocks. In November of 2020, Oregon became the first US state to legalize psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. Just like how California legalized medical marijuana way back in the mid-90s, the legalization of psilocybin is going to birth a whole new revolutionary industry in the world of medicine and health. In this video, we're going to explore why exactly the psychedelic industry is so disruptive, some of the major challenges and ailments that psychedelics are looking to help with that have never been solved before, some of the major pioneering companies in this space, some of the comparisons to the marijuana industry, the weed stocks of now, comparisons and similarities between them, and why I think the psychedelic space is one of the most innovative and disruptive sectors to invest in over the next decade. Psychedelics have existed in many cultures around the world for hundreds or even thousands of years, but in the year 1938, a Swiss chemist by the name of Albert Hofmann created the first synthesized version of a psychedelic, otherwise known as lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. After accidentally absorbing some of it into his fingertips, he experienced a radical transformation in his consciousness, leading to further experimentation with the drug. Decades of breakthrough research happened at clinics and universities around the world, leading to understanding about neurochemistry and how therapists might be able to treat all sorts of mental illnesses like never before. But by 1970, good old Dick Nixon had banned LSD and other psychedelic substances like magic mushrooms under the Controlled Substance Act, effectively cutting off all research on their therapeutic potential for decades. Fast forward to the 2010s, and the pharmaceutical industry has filled that gap with all sorts of manufactured drugs, like benzodiazepines for mental health or opioids for pain relief. And we've suffered the consequences of these drugs ever since. 1 in 5 patients that have been prescribed opioids have suffered an addiction or an abuse disorder, and over 49 million prescriptions for Xanax, which is just one form of benzo, were issued in the United States last year alone. If you've ever taken one of these drugs for a prolonged period of time or know somebody who has, then I need not explain anymore. The possible health benefits that these drugs offer are usually far outweighed by the side effects and negative addiction habits created that ripple through individuals and the communities around them. And up until recently, effective and alternative pain and mental health medication outside of these drugs was nearly impossible to access. Much in the way that marijuana has pioneered relief for those with pain, cancer, and other disabilities, psychedelics look to do so for mental health and substance addiction in a very similar fashion. In the last 5 years, many studies and elements of research have popped up with very, very promising results for psychedelics. MDMA, or ecstasy, has shown really positive results in helping with post-traumatic stress disorder. Ketamine infusions have been shown to almost reverse potentially non-reversible major depressive disorders in 30 to 40% of patients. And psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, has been shown to help and even cure alcohol and even tobacco addiction. But don't think this is just going to be like weed stocks 2.0. You're not going to be going down to your local Rite Aid to fill a prescription bottle full of mushrooms, and you're not going to be postmating MDMA on your way to Coachella either. There are quite a few publicly listed companies in the psychedelic space, but they're all chasing completely different aspects of the market. Where weed stocks became much about growing a large footprint or focusing on one specific element of the production or distribution chain, the giants in the psychedelic industry are not going to be chosen by how many greenhouses they have or how many dispensaries they own. Instead, the focus is completely split depending on what aspect of treatment through psychedelics that you're pursuing. One example here is ketamine, an already legal drug in North America that is being used to help with depressive disorders. Most people think of ketamine as an anesthetic, most commonly used in the 1960s on the battlefields of the Vietnam War. But its cognitive effects actually allow it to function in the treatment of severe depressive disorders. Now, while it hasn't been approved by the FDA for this sort of treatment, a whole bunch of public companies in Canada have already started offering ketamine infusions for psychotherapy. These companies can already start developing practice around the administration of psychedelic medicines. And for them, the race is not going to be how many mushrooms they can grow or sell, but how large their clinical footprint will be for this type of therapy. How do they incentivize doctors and therapists to carry out this type of practice? How do they streamline it and do it safely and effectively? And how do they use the revenue from this model to fund the next big thing, research? Behind many of the already budding public companies in the psychedelic space is a whole lot of research. And this will take years or even decades to pay off, with special authorization from US and Canadian governments to partake in such studies. The largest psychedelic companies by market share are all working on something a little bit different. The biggest of which is Compass Pathways, or CMPS, which is backed by venture investor Peter Thiel. Compass is focusing in particular on one specific drug called COMP360, a synthetic psilocybin which is already in stage 2 investigation for targeting treatment-resistant depression. If the drug is proven and approved for treatment of depression, Compass can receive a 7 to 8 year patent on the drug. However, it's an extremely binary bet, as Compass is focusing on this one single drug trial, with no other projects in the pipeline and no current source of revenue. The second largest company in this space is MindMed, otherwise known as MNMD, which has also recently gone public on the NASDAQ. Their focus is on a handful of different projects, with the biggest of which being called Project Lucy. Project Lucy aims to utilize therapeutic doses of LSD for anxiety disorders. Also in their pipeline is another drug candidate called 18-MC, a derivative of the psychoactive chemical ibogaine, as a potential treatment for opioid addiction. This one is already in phase 1 clinical trials, as well as 5 other projects in their pipeline, including MDMA and psilocybin, as well as the first ever clinical trial of mixing LSD and MDMA together for therapeutic usage. On the smaller end of things, there are dozens of small cap companies also participating in study and research of psychedelics. Most of these are based out of Canada, where in the interim there has been some easing up on the study of psychedelics. For example, Numinus Wellness became the first company to be issued a license from Health Canada to produce and extract psilocybin from magic mushrooms. But all of these companies, even the ones doing groundbreaking research, share 2 fundamental gigantic risks that you need to be aware of: the rate at which they burn cash and the uncertainty around the clinical efficacy of these projects. Most of these companies function like biotech companies, hinging on clinical trial success to validate their product and valuation. Should a trial fail or not show significant results, the entire value prospect of many of these multi-million and billion-dollar companies could crumble in a week or even a day. Not to mention that these projects cost immense amounts of money. The average FDA clinical trial costs around $19 million, and that's just for one drug. Compass Pathways reported a net loss of $60 million in 2020 with $0 in revenue. And how do these companies raise cash when they have no cash flow? They ring the register on Wall Street, doing new financing rounds and issuing tons of new shares at the expense of shareholders through dilution. Now, while that's far from uncommon in a lot of biotech and medical plays, it means that if you are going to invest in these companies, you better be in it for the long haul. The cannabis sector in Canada has faced similar challenges, with them ringing the register on Wall Street by creating new shares to fund things like greenhouse expansion projects or clinical studies because their businesses were unable to turn a profit. One of the more infamous examples of this is Aurora Cannabis, the 4th largest cannabis producer in Canada. In 2018, Aurora Cannabis had about 40 million shares outstanding, and even adjusting for the split, they now have about 200 million shares, and the stock price is down about 80% since the all-time high. This form of excess dilution and fundraising has already reared its ugly head in a few psychedelic stocks like MindMed, which has already seen its share count double in little under 12 months. While shareholders and long-term investors might not have a problem with funding their ongoing operations, nobody really likes to have their drink watered down. And in the world of clinical trials for psychedelic and mind-altering substances, You can bet in the 21st century we will have barely scratched the surface on the potential and power of psychedelics. In fact, one of the newest experiments in the field of psychedelics is microdosing, essentially taking a quarter or an eighth or a tenth of an LSD dose or a psilocybin dose to help with things like uplifting mood, helping with focus and concentration, and things like alleviating anxiety in the workplace or just day-to-day activity. If microdosing does become popular and legal around the world like it is in Oregon, it could open up huge demand for straight-up production of just psilocybin, which a lot of companies are actually already working on creating cheaper and synthetically. All that being said, I really think that the psychedelic industry is going to be one of the biggest investing opportunities over the next decade, because it's really going to revolutionize the way that we look at treating mental health and potentially treat some mental health problems that were formerly thought impossible to help with. And God knows, after a year and a half of a pandemic, there's going to be all sorts of new forms of depression and addiction formed, and having psychedelic medicine kind of come to the forefront around this time is almost a blessing in disguise. Now, the psychedelic industry as a whole has a lot wider scale than the weed industry, in my opinion. Where in the marijuana industry, you had people focusing on production of marijuana and building brands and focusing on one aspect of the production chain, with psychedelics, you can be a clinic company, you can be a psilocybin producer, you can be a research company and live off of patents. There are so many different options for how to proceed in this space, and I think it's going to be really important to pay attention to each one of these subsectors in terms of picking the biggest winners. In totality too, I think when it comes to the world of investing, you can't always choose to invest in things that you believe are morally right. Everyone's going to want to invest in oil or maybe these big tech giants that are censoring people, things that you don't agree with but invest in anyways because you want to make a bit of money and you see where the future is going. When it comes to psychedelics, I think there is no holds barred when it comes to investing in companies like this on a moral standpoint, because all of them are developing things that ultimately will help humanity progress and deal with the day-to-day in a much better way as time goes on. And I can only hope that these companies like MindMed and Compass Pathways reach the results of their clinical trials soon so that we can bring out these medications to people on a mass scale as soon as possible. And for those who are just here for the trading opportunities, I think psychedelics present a really interesting opportunity because I think that they're only in the first inning. If you followed weed stocks since 2014 or cryptocurrencies since 2011, all of these things have boom and bust cycles where they reach mainstream prominence, everyone wants to get in on them, and then the hype and the buzz kind of dies down and they crash down, and then they rev up for the next run a few years or months later as well. I think with the psychedelic industry, there's going to be a lot of hype. MindMed just listed on the NASDAQ, which went up, I think, like 100% in 2 or 3 days and has already crashed 40-50%. But in my opinion, again, I think it's only the first inning and there's so much more to come as these companies release clinical trials and more people learn about the wonderful world of psychedelics and how it can help mental health. Anyway, that's all my take on the whole psychedelic space. I'm so excited to talk more about it in the future. If you have any questions about it, let me know in the comment section down below. And let me know, are you guys planning on investing in the psychedelic space? Have you already invested in these companies like MindMed? Are there ones that I didn't mention in this video that you think are promising? Let me know in the comments section below and I'll respond to each and every one of your comments. And of course, thank you so much for watching this video. Every week it's such a joy to put out these things and kind of learn and research stuff myself and share it with you guys. And getting this feedback that I have is awesome. We just crossed 4,000 subscribers. The goal is 10,000 by the end of 2021. Let's make that happen. So if you haven't already, please subscribe down below. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned and I'll see you in the next one. And there may or may have not been mushrooms in my coffee today. You'll never know.